සංනිවේදනය කරමු. ශ්‍රී ලංකා ටෙලිකොම් වෙතින් සදහම් පණිවිඩයක්. දැති සිද්ධායකත්වය
ශ්‍රී ලංකා ඉන්ෂුරන්ස් පියකුමෙන් මවකමෙන්
ලංකා බැංකුව නව්‍යකරණයෙන් ඉදිරියටම මහජන බැංකුව මහජනතාවගේ බැංකුව
ඔබ මැලිබන් සමාගමයි මැලිබන් යහගුණයෙන් තව තවත් ඉදිරියට
ජීවිතයේ තබන හැම වැදගත් පියවරකටම DSI ඇංක කිරේ එදත් අදත් හෙටත් හොඳම දේ පමණයි.
තවත් තෑගිරාශයක් දරුදිරි සම්පත ජාතික ලොතරැයි මණ්ඩලය මැදිකරගත් බිස්කට් කැබලි වලින් වට වූ එලිෆන්ට් හවුස් වන්ඩර් චොක් ෂොක්
Sri Lanka. A journey awaits.
Safeguard නිරෝගිමත් දිවියකට.
Now you are watching the world most historical and the cultural event, Kandy Esala Perahera, live from the Royal City of Kandy.
සේකණ්ඩ ශෛලපුර විරාජමාන වූ මුතුන් මල්කට බඳු දළදා සමිඳු වැඳ අවසර ගන්නේ උතුම් පෙරහැර කරුණ වහන්සේ ගජ තේජසින් යුතුව වැඩම වීමට පින් ලැබෙති වන්දන සාදු මමලං ජිනදන්ත ධාතුම්
ඔබ සැමට උතුම් දළදා සමුදු සරණයි. මේ ඓතිහාසික කඳුඩරට ඇසළ පෙරහැර මහා මංගල්‍යයේ දෙවන කුඹල් පෙරහැර වීථි සංචාරය කරන දිනය. විශේෂයෙන් මල්ලොත් වස්කිරි උභය මහා විහාරීය මහා නායක මාහිම්පාණන් වහන්සේලාගේ අවවාද අනුශාසනා පෙරදැරිව ශ්‍රී දළදා මාලිගාවේ ගරු දේවන් නිලමේතුමන් සිව් මහා දේවාලයන්හි බස්නායක නිලමේතුමන්ලාගේ මූලිකත්වයෙන් මෙවරත් පෙරහැර මංගල්‍ය සංවිධානය වෙනවා. වෙනදා මහනුවර වීදිවලට රැස්ව මේ පෙරහැර මංගල්‍ය අසිරිය ඔබට අද දවසේ අත්විඳින්න හැකියාවක් ලැබෙන්නේ නැහැ. නමුත් ඔබට පුළුවන් විද්‍යුත් මාධ්‍ය ඔස්සේ, රූපවාහිනිය ඔස්සේ, අන්තර්ජාලය ඔස්සේ මේ පෙරහැර මංගල්‍ය අසිරිය අත්විඳින්නට. විශේෂයෙන් ශ්‍රී දළදා මාලිගාවේ www.sridaldamaligawa.lk වෙබ් අඩවිය සහ YouTube සහ Facebook නාලිකාව ඔස්සේ ඔබට පෙරහැර මේ සජීවීව අත්විඳින්න පුළුවන්. ඒ නිසා නිවසේ රැඳී සිටින ඔබට උතුම් දළදා හාමුදුරුවන්ගේ ආශිර්වාදය ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරගනිමින් ඓතිහාසික කඳුඩරට ඇසළ පෙරහැර මහා මංගල්‍යයේ දෙවන කුඹල් පෙරහැරේ වීථි සංචාරය කරන මේ අසිරිය ඔබට අත්විඳින්න අපි ගෞරවයෙන් ආරාධනා කරනවා.
Dalada Samindu Pihitai. You are now joining us with a special live broadcast of the second Kumbal Procession brought to you by the Media Bureau of Sri Dalada Maligawa.
Of the Diyavadana Nilame before commencing their straight perambulations.
Making his way from the upper to the lower chamber, the Diyavadana Nilame ceremoniously and reverentially takes the relic casket under the protection of the chief incumbent of the Malwatha Mahavihara, Venerable Tibbotuwave Sri Medankara Thero, to the royal casket.
The relic casket is placed within the round relic mountain on the adorned casket will light up the Kumbal Procession.
Marking the beginning of the Kandy Esala Perahera, dedicated to Lord Buddha, we see the Perahera officials offering flowers and garlands to the Perahera casket.
This is the devout moment when the great Tusker steps majestically down from the Mahamahal and the Sagala in preparation to walk the streets of the city of Kandy.
Now you see the start of the second Kumbal Procession of Sri Dalada Maligawa.
Walking up front with the sound of whips piercing through the skies are the whip wielders.
The duty of the whip master is to clear the way for the holy Perahera casket. In single file, they wield their whips to notify the citizens of the impending approach of the Bhupati or the king.
It should be noted that the whip has to be carefully manipulated without hurting their colleagues. Although whip conjures up fear in most minds, the sight of the Perahera whip masters has the opposite effect, calming the populace. Since they are the ones who clear the way for the holy Perahera casket to be carried in the streets of the city.
This time the onset of the Perahera is a bit different. On other days we can see thousands of people lining up the streets, throwing coins on the streets to show their offering to the casket. But this time we don't see that.
අපිට කතා කරන්න තියෙන්නේ අර ඔබ වහන්සේ වදාලා විදිහටම වර්ෂාවක් එන්නට ප්‍රථම විශාල ගෙරවිලි හඬක් විදුලි කටන ශබ්දයක් ඇති වෙනවා. විශාල ගෙරවිලි හඬක් ඒ සංකේතක ඒ වගේම දනන්දා පෙරහැර එන බව සනිටුවම් කරන්න එක තමයි දුර සිගනායට ඒ දැනීම වෙනුවෙන් තමයි මේ කස නාදේ පතුරවන්නේ කියලායි මගේ අදහස අපේ හාමුදුරනේ.
In the times of the kings, the whip was an instrument of punishment. But this is not a duty of that nature. Here, the instrument is used to remove fear, create a sense of love and compassion among the people and bring merit to them.
The whip master's duty is handed down from generation to generation of their clans. According to our traditions, Peraheras that do not have this pedigree are not even worth being called such.
The sound of the whip wielders is equivalent to the sound of lightning strikes.
හරි අපූරුවට මේ කසකරුවන්
The Esala Perahera
ගති
is
ජබය
celebrated
ගුවනට මුදා හරින විට
to pay the homage to the gods, requesting to bless our crops and cultivations with rain. And this special event,
දොංකාරයක්
the whip
මේ
wielders
මහනුවර පුරවරයට
resemble
එකතු කරනවා.
the thundering skies.
ඒ වගේම අපට පෙන්වන මේ පෙරහැරෙහි බෞද්ධ දර්ශනයට අදාළ අර්ථයන් මේ සංස්කෘති අංගයන් වගේම පෙන්눔 කරන්නා වූ අවස්ථාවක් බවට අපට පෙන්වන්න පුළුවන්. කසකරුවන්ගේ නික්ම යාම සනිටුහන් වන විට ඊටමත් අලංකාරවත්ව නර්තන
Following the
ලීලාවෙන්
whip wielders,
ඉදිරියට
we can
ඇදෙන්නේ
see the fire dancers
ගිනි බෝල කරුවන්.
coming up ahead.
කසකරුවන්ගෙන් හෙන හඬ
We can
පුපුරන
see the
නාදය
younger
ඇසුනා වගේම
generations
ගිනි
following
බෝල
of the
කරුවන්ගෙන්
traditions of
සංකේතවත්
their
වන්නේ
clans.
අපි තෙන්නගොන් මැතිතුමනි ඒත් හොඳ සංකේතාර්ථයක්.
එහෙමයි. මිනිසාට ගින්දර කියන එක තමයි අවශ්‍ය වෙන්නේ. ජලය, ගින්දර, සුළඟ කියන දේ අපේ මෙහිතලයේ මත සිටින සියලුම මේ සත්වයින්ට අවශ්‍ය වෙන දෙයක්. ඒ නිසා ඇත්ත වශයෙන්ම ආලෝකයක් මේ අන්ධකාරයේ දුරු කරමින්
This is a very good signal
රළු
that our
ගොරෝසු
culture and the
හඬ
inheritance is not
පිපිරීම්
going to
හඬ
disappear within
යනවත් එක්කම
This is a very good
සියලු
sign
දෙනාට
that our
ආලෝකයේ
culture,
විහිදෙමින්
our inheritance,
මේ
our traditions
ගිනි
will
පන්දම්
last for a
කරුවන්
long, long
විවිධ
time.
රටාවලට මේ
Of
ගිනි
course,
පන්දම මෙහෙයවමින්
Just
අපිට
as the
දෙන්නේ
lightning flashes
ඉතාම
across
ලොකු
the skies, the
මේ
Perahera
සතුටක්
too has
ඒ
its
වගේම
flashes of
ලොකු
light
අදහසක් අපේ
leaping
හැමෝම
across the faces
ඒ වගේම
of those who
මහා
are
වර්ෂාවක්
performing.
ඇද හැලින්නට පෙර
This is the
ආතුව
offering
අපට
of fire
දර්ශනය
to the
වන
gods to water
අකුණු
the
සර
earth with rain.
ආලෝකයක් මේ ගිනි පන්දම් මගින් සංකේතවත් වන බවයි පෙරහැර පිළිබඳව මේ චාරිත්‍ර වලින් අපට පෙන්වන්නේ. පාසල් නිමාඩු සමයක අපේ ආගමට දහමට මේ පුංචි දරුවන් එක් වී තිබෙන ඊටාම
We can see how
සන්තුෂ්ටිදායක
confident this little kid
අවස්ථාවක්.
is in manipulating fireballs
පරම්පරාවෙන්
around him.
පරම්පරාවට සංස්කෘතියේ පවරා දෙන
Such a
අවස්ථාවක්.
splendid view.
කිසිදු
The
ආයාසයකින් තොරව
sight of lightning as a
තමන්ගේ
precursor to the descent of
වැඩිහිටි
rainbows is a
ඇදුරන්ගේ
phenomenon of
කරමැති
nature.
මේ පුංචි දරුවන් ගිනි හරඹ දක්වන්නේ දළදා
And those blinding flashes are a cooling heat in the Kandy Esala Perahera procession. This is the heritage of the traditions of our torch dances.
The balls of fire of these dancers are wielded in rotational forms, painting the night with varied patterns of light.
Once the oil-soaked rags are lit and tied to the ends of the wielding sticks with leather thongs, they are akin to lightning strikes to the eye.
The sun, moon, earth, universe, solar month, night and day are all cyclic, and the fire dancers highlight these universal cycles and how they burn and cool us in our life cycles.
The fire dancers, completely focused and immersed in their art, keeping in their minds and bodies one-pointed as they create their cyclic patterns of fire. This is because the slightest inattention could result in a disaster.
The dancers tame fire and give it as a Dalada offering, mindful of its part in cooking, protecting crops and chairs and dispelling darkness, while creating curiosity, satisfaction and amazement to the people who are viewing the procession, this time not on the streets but online.
The true import of these dancers is seen when a large group of them perform simultaneously merging their various fiery elements into an amazing display of light and heat.
The sight of the Buddhist flag creates a sense of unreflecting joy in the part of the people viewing the Kandy Esala procession, reminding of them that this is a celebration, devotion, and an offering to the Lord Buddha. The flag bearers are coming up next in the second Kumbal Procession.
Talking about the Buddhist flag, it should be noted that the different colors represented in the flag refer to different facts about Buddhism. The blue color represents the universal compassion, whereas white represents purity and liberation. Yellow represents the middle path, and red color represents the blessings.
I think at such a remarkable time, it's noteworthy the designers of the Buddhist flag. The Buddhist flag was jointly designed by Mr. J.R. De Silva and Colonel Henry S. Olcott to mark the revival of Buddhism in Ceylon. And it was accepted as the International Buddhist flag in 1952 at the World Buddhist Congress.
The six-colored flag is displayed in ceremonious form to remind the people simply of the great scope and depth of the Buddha's Dhamma.
The hexa-colored flag garlands the people with six-colored radiation of light attributed to the Buddha's cooling them as nothing else possibly can.
The flag bearers create a sense of the unlimited compassion of the Buddha through the sacred Dalada tree. The sight calms undisciplined, wayward minds and focuses them on a procession of love and compassion radiating across the universe.
Coming into sight are the sword bearers. These sword carriers symbolize the protection given to the Perahera.
Coming up now is the first elephant of the Kandy Esala Perahera II. This is the Banda Alia.
Mounted on Banda, now we see the Peramune going in the procession in all the majesty. It is a norm of the procession that the Peramune or the leader of the procession is the first person on elephant back, and neither officials nor elephants are permitted to arrive before the Peramune
Rala.
This is the first heavy beaters of the second Kumbal Procession.
Until the heavy drum beaters permanently seconded to the service of the Sri Dalada Maligawa arrive in procession, no Panchaturya Vadana or making sound via the drums or musical instruments is permitted.
This prohibition of the use of other traditional musical instruments before the first Hevisi, namely the horanava, talampata, cymbals, daula, conch, kombua and anklets, is to ensure that the order of playing these instruments is not compromised. This is the Hevisi troupe of Sri Dalada Maligawa, making their way to the streets of the Kandy city.
Following the Hevisi troupe, we can see the second elephant making his way in the streets of Kandy, and he is Kotte Raja the Tusker.
Mounted on him, now we see the Gajanayaka Nilame, Mr. Palitha Jayawardena, making his way majestically to the streets of the hill capital. The Gajanayaka Nilame arrives as the royal official in charge of the king's troop of elephants, and it is a position given to him directly by the king himself.
The water carrier dancers, in other words, Kothalapada dancers, depict purity. This dance is simple, and it is an example of the simplicity of the Buddhists.
This is why the water carrier is traditionally valued in Buddhism. Our viewers should be reminded of the Pirit water carrier, the yellow water carrier and the milk water carrier when they see these dances.
The dancers spray the Pirit water on the earth of nation. Seeing this, our hearts are lifted by the knowledge and vision of our fertile and beautiful land.
Following the Kothalapada dancers, taking his majestic strides, is the Janaraja Tusker. Mounted on the Janaraja Tusker is a carrier of a Buddhist flag.
You can see the devotion in the faces of these performers.
These are in fact called the Chamara dancers.
Following those magnificent chamara dances is the elephant Gajaba moving forward in the Kandy Esala procession.
He is draped in magnificent white robes symbolizing the purity it has to offer to the Dalada Perahera. We can see the torches lighting up the way to the Perahera. Now we see the tambourine players coming into play. The tambourine is called as Pantheru in the Sinhala language.
And we can see the Pantheru dancers being accompanied by the drum players.
In this dance, we can see a unique form of singing which is accompanied to this Pantheru dance. Through the lit up streets, now we see Singharaja, the magnificent tusker, making royal strides in the streets of the Kandy city. Mounted on him, now we see a snake god. Coming into sight following the Singharaja tusker is the Nayandi dancers. We can see from far that the royal casket is arriving.
The Nayandi dancing is a little bit similar to the West dancing tradition.
The only difference is that they are without the headgear. we can see that these Nayandi dancers are accompanied by an enthusiastic group of Gatabera drummers.
Following the dancers, now we can see two magnificent elephants making their way. They are called the Velagidra elephant and the Hetimulla elephant. We can see a troupe of West dancers making their way in the streets of Kandy.
This is in fact the iconic dance of the heritage of Sri Lanka. This dance is of course a feast to the eyes. In ancient times, they obtained a royal boon after having donned by the Vestattua and danced for the king of Panuvastumara to dispel unforeseen inimical forces that threatened his
Their dance is accompanied by the Gatabera drummers.
Coming into sight is the Karya Karavana Korala. The Karya Karavana Korala is the second in command of the Devarin Nilame, and it is a heritage position given by the royal decree.
The Karyakaram Korale observes with or not the complex and unique rituals and devotions associated with Dalada Maligawa Perahera are conducted in accordance with the decrees and in orders that have previously been laid down.
What you just witnessed is the royal casket carried by Indi Raja, and on either side are Burma Raja and Mian Raja. And now we see the chamber of the Vesifiers.
These are the royally appointed poets of Sri Dalada Maligawa.
Now we see another troupe of West dancers making their way in the streets of the hill capital, marking the second Kumbal Procession. The West dancers dance, paying their homage to the Dalada Nilame.
The Dalada Nilame is appointed by royal decree, and he is the individual tasked with protecting the Dalada with his own life.
The honor and respect provided by the Tun Singhale to the king for the land is given to the Dalada Nilame. The Dalada Nilame ensures that the rituals and traditions associated with the Dalada Maligawa are strictly adhered to. Additionally, he is responsible for protecting those who are part of the great Dalada heritage.
Here one has the uplifting sight that reminds us of our ancient Kandian glory, with the Dalada Nilame walking in state, adulated by a massive troupe of Kandian dancers in their regalia and watched over by his armed guards.
In fact, only the Dalada Nilame is permitted to walk under a muthukuda or a pearl umbrella, since he represents the king himself in possession. Now we can see the chief trustee of the Natha Devalaya, Mr. Gayan Hinkenda, representing the Dalada Nilame. We can see the guards lining in two lines on either side of the Dalada Nilame, providing the respect and the protection to him. Now we witness the start of the Natha Devala procession.
The Natha Devala is one of the oldest Devalas existing in Kandy. The god Natha is revered by the Buddhists as the god who is making his paramita to become the next Buddha, according to the Theravada Buddhist tradition.
Now we can see the chief trustee of the Natha Devalaya carrying the relic casket to be mounted on the elephant. Coming into our sight first in the Natha Devala are the Buddhist flag carriers, and they represent that the Natha Devala procession also is a procession dedicated to Lord Buddha.
Coming up front in the Natha Devala procession is the Dimbulagala elephant, who belongs to the Dimbulagala temple.
We can see he is robed in the yellow color, which signifies the god Natha. And this is the Hevisi troop, led by Mr. SYG Vijay Sena.
Troop, we can see a very energetic young elephant making his way in the Kandy Esala procession. Namely, this is the elephant called Arjuna, and he belongs to the Vauru Kandala Raja Mahavihara's chief priest.
In fact, god Natha is yellow in complexion, and the sign of the swan associated with him is displayed in this parallel. We can see that the elephants are draped in yellow color, symbolizing the color of god Natha. And throughout the Natha Devala Perahera, we can see the Buddhist flag being symbolized, remembering us that this is a procession dedicated to Lord Buddha.
Now we can see another Nayandi dancer's troupe. This troupe has been trained by Mr. Vishuddhi Verapitiya. Following these magnificent Nayandi dances, we can see two Dale elephants making their way.
One is Taraka, who is owned by Mr. Gayan Hinkenda, and the other is Kandula, who is owned by Mr. Roshan from Maharagam. We can see these young elephants making their way, swaying to either sides, taking their own pace in their strides.
The symbol of the sun and the moon, representing the world order.
As much behaved they are, they can't stop swaying to these wonderful beats of the drums and the tunes of the flutes.
The Savaram troupe that you see now have been trained by Mr. Dilshan Shalika, and it is a group consisting of 36 members.
We can see the tunes of the flutes and the beats of drums accompanying them to make the best performance in homage to the sacred tooth relic. The Savarang or the fans resembles that they are sending cooling breezes to the Nath Devala casket.
Following up are three magnificent elephants. The first out of these three is called Rohana, and he belongs to Mr. Kannangara. The other two elephants are called Bandara and Kumari respectively, are owned by Mr. Kamal Kitsiri and his family.
Following those three elephants, now we see another troupe of Nayandi dancers who were trained by Mr. Asanka Karunaratne. We see an official representing the chief trustee of Natha Devala marching in front of the elephant who is carrying the godly ornaments of God Natha.
energetic performance by the Nayandi performers, we now see 3 elephants making their way in Kandy Esala Perahera.
The one who's carrying the godly ornaments of Godnatha is Muthuraja from the Kandy Viharaya, who is owned by the chief prelate of Kandy Viharaya, Venerable Vipula Sarathero.
The 2 elephants on either side are Godakamarani, who belongs to Mr. Nalaka Jayasinghe, and Kandy Vihara Kumari belongs to the chief monk of Kandy Vihara.
And that marks the end of the Natha Devalaya, starting the Vishnu Devala Perahera. You can see the chief trustee of the Vishnu Devalaya carrying the godly ornaments of God Vishnu to be mounted on the tusker who is carrying the godly ornaments in the second Kumbal Procession today.
It should be noted that the color associated with God Vishnu is blue. So throughout the Vishnu Devala procession, we will be able to see the blue color.
We can see the Disa flags going up front in the Vishnu Devala Perahera as the first event in the Vishnu Devala Perahera.
God Vishnu was supposed to appear in 10 different apparitions or avatars, and he is also aspired to become a Buddha in time to come. His major duties were to bless every living being and to protect the Buddha Shasana.
And also God Vishnu is thought to be the god overseeing the well-being of the island of Sri Lanka. The Vishnu Devalaya plays a vital role as the custodian, as the main distributor of cup to the other 3 Devalayas, and the place where Baliyak Natuma is held at the end of the Asala procession.
Now we can see the heavy group of Sri Vishnu Devalaya Kandy. Following the heavy troop, you can now see the Mutiyarane Kandula elephant making his way in the procession.
In fact, Kandula is draped in blue color, which represents the iconic color of God Vishnu. And we can see all the costumes of the dancers are also designed in a shade of blue representing the color of God Vishnu.
efficient elephant, we can see two officials bearing two canopies, representing the protection to the godly ornaments of God Vishnu.
This moonlit beautiful night, along with the moon rays that are reflected on the still waters of the Kandy lake, we see the shimmer of brilliant blue of these Savaran dancers.
This is once again a spectacular Savaran performance. When King Vijay was landed on the bronze sands of Sri Lanka, the king and his crowd was deemed to be protected by God Vishnu. This was even when during the period of Lord Buddha, although he lay on his deathbed. Therefore, it is safe to say the culture of God Vishnu was embraced by Sri Lanka with the arrival of the Aryans.
Behind these Savarang dancers, now we see the two Rathkarawet she-tuskers. It is indeed incredible to watch how these massive tuskers are so graceful in performing their task which is entrusted upon them.
Exactly, Chamoda. Elephants have been part of our culture for thousands of years, and they still remain as part of our great culture.
Following the two she-tuskers, now we see another troupe of Nayandi dancers. of the tusker carrying the godly ornaments of God Vishnu, now we see the chief trustee of the Vishnu Devalaya marching the streets of the hill capital.
Following that, we can see the three giant elephants making their way, carrying the sacred godly ornaments of God Vishnu. The elephant honored with the burden of God Vishnu this time is called Ekadanta, and on either side, the she-tuskers Mali and Alapata are making their way.
We can see that the she-tuskers on either side are draped in garments which marks the Gurula, who is the symbolic animal of God Vishnu. See the start of the Katharagama Devala procession. The godly ornaments of God Katharagama are being mounted on the tusker.
The flag bearers mark the first part of Sri Katharagama Devala procession.
When talking about God Katharagama, who travelled in a peacock vehicle, is believed to have 6 heads and 12 hands. In honor of God Katharagama, the trustee protects the godly ornaments by their lives. Now we can see the Buddhist flag bearers making their way in the Katharagama Esala Perahera. But then, God Katharagama has an inclination to the Hindus also.
Yes, Chamoda. In fact, the majority of Sri Lankans widely worship God Katharagama. Even the Hindus have revered God Katharagama. He is a very strong and powerful god.
In particular, the Sri Lanka's history consists of a great array of stories and folklore associated with God Katharagama amongst the other gods that are worshipped.
The Katharagama Devalaya in Kandy had been built in the 14th century and it became more popular by the 16th century. It was dedicated to god Skandakumara or god Katharagama, and it is believed that he had 6 faces and 12 hands.
Following the flag bearers, now we can see the first heavy beaters of the Kataragama Devalaya procession.
This heavy troop has been trained by Mr. P.V. James, Guru Nansi.
Every Devala procession has a color unique to it. We see that the Kataragama Devala procession is dominated by the color of bright red. The elephants and tuskers are draped in such fascinatingly designed cloth and attire that adds to the festivity and beauty of the entire procession.
Now we can see the first elephant representing the Kataragama procession. And this is the she-tusker Manike.
And she is owned by Mr. Anurag Kempitia.
We now witness that the Talamputta dancers are making their way in the procession. By the look of it, even though it seems to be a very basic music instrument, the clash of the two metal discs of the instruments produces a very striking yet melodious sound. The Talamputta are the metal percussion instruments that are almost always made up of cymbals and two small cymbals joined together by a string.
We can see that they are accompanied by a small flute player. Their talents at such a young age is really due for our respect, because they are the people who are carrying the traditions of Sri Lanka forward.
Following that, now we can see the Udaki players. The Udaki is a small drum.
We can see that they have attached a string to the udakia to make their performance more glamorous.
Following that, we can see the elephant called Vishwa, who belongs to Meerigama Sri Shasanavardhana Piruvana.
And now we see another beautiful troupe of Nayandi dancers.
The Nayandi performance, as you can see, are paving the way for the godly ornaments of God Kataragama.
Followed by the Nayandi dancers, now we can see the chief trustee of the Kataragama Devalaya. In fact, their costumes are a bit different from what we saw in the processions so far. And also it can be seen that there's a South Indian touch to these costumes.
What we see now is a godly ornament of God Kataragama.
And today, the burden of the godly ornaments is carried by the Asala Tusker, who is belong to the Pirisyala Senanayaka Mudilindarama Mahavihara.
And on either sides we have Handala the elephant and Kumari the she-tusker.
And Handala is owned by Venerable Higgoda Sri Saddha Nayaka Thero. And now we see the start of the Pattini Devala procession.
The Pattini Devalaya is one of the most popular Devala processions.
And also this Pattini is a deity who commands great respect among most of the citizenry in the country. So we can see the chief trustee of the Pattini Devalaya wearing the godly ornaments of Goddess Pattini to be mounted on the tusker, who is making his way in the streets of Kandy city today.
Now we can see the Buddhist flag carriers of Sri Pattini Devalaya.
And these Buddhist flag carriers are from the task forces of Sri Lanka.
It should be noted that the Pattini Devala procession is the only female representation of the entire Esala Perahera tradition.
We can see the Sita she-tusker from Maharagama, who is owned by Mr. Rohan from Maharagama, making her way in the streets of the hill capital at the second Kumbal Procession. And following the she-tusker, now we see the hair exhibitors of the Pattini Devala Perahera.
history that entails with Goddess Pattini can be traced back to the time when King Gajaba of Sri Lanka brought home the anklet of Goddess Pattini from South India. Since the Anuradhapura era, worshipping Goddess Pattini became an embodiment of our cultural heritage. Whenever children are sick, mothers used to seek help from Goddess Pattini to help cure their beloved children. Therefore, mothers had such high regard and respect to the goddess as a savior and protector whom they can rely on.
And also in the entire Asala procession, the only female representation in terms of the presenters is also in the Pattini Esala Perahera. Now we can see a beautiful troup of young ladies making a beautiful charmer performance draped in beautiful yellow colored dresses, which is the symbolic color of Goddess Pattini.
These dancers take on the street with such a beauty and grace, paying no heed to their gentle souls.
We see another two playful elephants making their way in the streets of the hill capital. One is really playful and he's waving to either side.
One of them is called Maharagama Kadira and he belongs to chief monk of Maharagama Puakpitiya temple. The other is a she-tusker called Manike and she belongs to Miss Shriyani Gunavardhana from Dangmovita.
And now we see another troupe of Nayandi dancers dancing their way in front of the godly ornaments of Goddess Pattini. This troupe of Nayandi dancers was trained by Mr. Mithun Bandara from the Mithun Bandara Kalayatanaya, Watapuluwa.
Following that, we see
the chief trustee of the Pattini Devalaya marching in front of the tusker carrying the godly ornaments of Goddess Pattini.
the tusker burdened with the godly ornaments of Sri Pattini Devala this time is none other than Mangala the elephant, and he is owned by Mr. Udara Galapati from Giriyulla.
On either side are Chuti Manike she-tusker and Gonakumbura she-tusker, respectively owned by Mr. R.S.U. Nishankar and Mr. Richard Gonakumbura. What you just saw was the conclusion of the second Kumbal Procession. We are grateful for the help and commitment of both state and non-state supporters who worked tirelessly to make this event successful.
Let there be timely rains that will bring life-giving waters to our fields and ensure a bountiful harvest.
May our country prosper. Dalada Samila Peter.
සෙන්කණ්ඩ ශෛලපුර විරාජමාන වූ මුතුන් මල්කට බඳු දළදා සමිඳු ඇඳ අවසර ගන්නේ උතුම් පෙරහැර කරුණ වහන්සේ ගජ තේජසින් යුතුව වැඩම වීමට පින් ලැබෙති වන්දාමි සාදු මමලං ජිනදන්ත ධාතුන්